Look at her! Pathetic and useless, a disgrace to everyone here. I will drag her out. Let everyone see how weak and worthless she really is. He yanked her mother by the arm, twisting her like a rag doll, laughing as she stumbled in her shoes. He shoved her forward, sneering at the gasps and shocked whispers of the crowd. Hurry up, before I lose my patience, he spat, his eyes glinting with pure malice. Every word, every movement was designed to humiliate and to make her feel small, powerless, and exposed. Her mother's cheeks burned with shame, her hands trembling, but even in his cruelty, something awakened in her daughter. In that moment of utter degradation, she made a choice, a defiant, audacious act that silenced the hall, shocked everyone present, and turned her despair into power. This is the story of a woman thrown into the fire of humiliation, mocked and broken before the world, who rose with a courage so fierce it left even the cruelest heart trembling. And today it is being retold by me. Hello family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please, subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every time you click that button, you're helping us share voices that would otherwise be forgotten and stories that deserve to be heard. And in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, because together, we are not just telling stories, we are keeping hope alive. The reception hall sparkled like a dream. Golden chandeliers lit up the wide room, and soft music floated through the air. Laughter, clinking glasses, and whispers of admiration followed Emma wherever she went. She had never felt so proud. Her lace gown flowed around her like sunlight, and her smile was brighter than all the candles on the tables. She held Richard's hand tightly, thinking to herself, "This is it. This is happiness. I finally made it." Her mother, Grace, sat near the front table, wiping away tears with a small handkerchief. Grace wore her best dress, simple and neat, but compared to the glittering diamonds around her, she looked almost out of place. Still, her eyes shone with love as she watched her daughter. Emma caught her mother's gaze and smiled warmly. It doesn't matter where we came from, she thought. We're here now. We're family. The guests clapped as Richard raised a glass for a toast. His deep voice carried easily across the room. "To my beautiful bride, Emma," he said with a charming smile. "May this be the beginning of our forever." Emma's heart swelled. She leaned closer to him, whispering, "Thank you, Richard. You've made me the happiest woman alive." He squeezed her hand. His smile was perfect, but for a moment, his eyes flickered with something sharp, something Emma couldn't quite name. Before she could think about it, music rose again, and guests crowded the floor, laughing and dancing. Emma relaxed. She told herself it was just nerves. It's our wedding day. He's probably just overwhelmed. Grace, shy but glowing with pride, stepped forward to greet some of Richard's relatives. "You raised a wonderful son," she said politely to Victoria, Richard's mother. Victoria's lips curled into a cold, polite smile. She was dressed in dark silk and diamonds, her presence commanding the room. We'll see if she can keep up with him," she replied, her tone clipped. Grace flushed and stepped back, hurt but too polite to respond. Emma noticed the exchange, but brushed it off. "Mother just isn't used to their ways. Everything will be fine." Then it happened. Richard turned suddenly, his hand shooting out like a whip. He grabbed Grace by the wrist. The music faltered. Laughter faded. Guests turned to watch. Richard's voice was sharp and cutting. "What do you think you're doing?" Grace gasped, startled. I was only trying to—" "Don't embarrass me," he hissed, his grip tightening. He yanked her forward, dragging her across the floor like she was a criminal being hauled to court. Grace stumbled, her shoes scraping against the marble. Gasps echoed through the hall. A few guests exchanged shocked looks. Others smirked, whispering behind their hands. "Look at her," Richard said loudly, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Pathetic, useless, A disgrace to everyone here." Emma froze. Her heart pounded. What is he doing? Why is he saying this? Grace tried to pull away, her cheeks burning with shame. "Please, Richard," she whispered, trembling. "You're hurting me." But he shoved her forward like she was nothing more than a rag doll. "Get out of my sight before I lose my patience." Emma rushed forward, panic in her eyes. "Richard, stop! That's my mother." He turned on her, his face twisting into a sneer. "Exactly. Your mother, dragging down my name, sitting here like she belongs among real people." He pointed to the guests. "Do you see them laughing? Do you see the whispers? They know the truth. She doesn't belong here, and neither do you." Emma's world spun. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Whispers sliced through the air like knives. "Is this real?" someone murmured. "Why would he say that?" another voice asked. "She's from a poor family, isn't she?" came a mocking laugh. Emma's chest tightened. She looked at her mother, who stood shaking, her hands clutched tightly together. Grace's eyes brimmed with tears, but she said nothing. "Richard, please," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't do this." "Not here," but Richard smirked. "This is exactly the place. Let everyone see who you really are. A beggar's daughter who thought she could marry into class. Don't forget your place, Emma. You're only here because I allowed it." Emma's lips parted, but no sound came out. Her fairy tale had collapsed in minutes, and Richard, calm and cruel, stood proud in the center of it all, like this had been his plan all along. The hall was silent, except for the faint hum of the chandelier lights above. Guests shifted uneasily, some looking down at their glasses, others whispering behind jeweled hands. The music had stopped completely. Emma stood frozen, her heart pounding in her ears. Her mother's wrist still bore the red mark from Richard's grip. Grace's voice trembled. "Richard, I meant no disrespect. I only wanted to thank your family." "Thank my family?" Richard barked out a sharp laugh. "You think they need thanks from you? Do you even realize the shame you bring to this room by just being here?" Gasps rippled through the crowd again. Some shook their heads in pity. Others, his friends, laughed quietly, enjoying the show. Emma clutched Richard's arm desperately. "Stop! You're humiliating her. You're humiliating me." Richard turned slowly, his face inches from hers. His voice dropped low, but loud enough for all to hear. "Exactly. That's the point. You need to understand your place, Emma. You and your mother both. This isn't your world. I pulled you out of the gutter. Don't forget that." Emma's throat closed. The man who only hours ago had whispered promises of love now looked at her like she was dirt beneath his shoe. A sharp voice cut through the tension. "Enough," Victoria said, her heels clicking as she stepped forward. All eyes turned to her. She stood tall, her diamond necklace glinting under the lights, her face calm but merciless. "Richard," she said smoothly, "there is no need to explain to everyone." "They already know." Emma's eyes darted to her mother-in-law. "Know what?" she asked, her voice shaking. Victoria tilted her head, her tone polite but dripping with poison. "That we saved you. We lifted you from poverty. Without us, you'd be nothing but a waitress in some forgotten diner, struggling to pay rent. You should be grateful we even allowed this arrangement." Emma staggered back as if she had been slapped. "Arrangement," she whispered. "Yes," Victoria said, her smile razor-sharp. "Did you truly think my son married you for love?" Look around, Emma. These are people of power, of wealth, of legacy. And you? She looked Emma up and down with disdain. You brought nothing but a sickly old mother and a past you should be ashamed of. Grace's lips trembled. How dare you? Victoria's eyes narrowed like ice. How dare I? No, Mrs. Collins. How dare you walk into this hall and pretend you belong among us? Do you know how humiliating it is to introduce you as my daughter-in-law? You should have stayed where you belonged, hidden, silent, invisible. A cruel laugh rose from the back of the hall. Emma's face burned. Her fingers shook as she clutched her gown. Richard stepped closer, his arm sliding casually around Sophie. Yes, Sophie. The woman Emma had only noticed in passing earlier. Sophie stood smugly, her red lips curling in satisfaction, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Richard raised his voice so all could hear. My family deserves more than this joke. Tonight is the beginning of Emma learning her true place. She'll either bend to our will or be discarded. And trust me, no one here would miss her. The words sliced straight into Emma's chest. She felt the air leave her lungs, the ground tilt beneath her. Her dream, her marriage, her love, all revealed as a cruel game. Grace clutched her daughter's arm. Emma, let's leave. We don't need this. We don't need them. But Emma couldn't move. Her body refused to respond. She stared at Richard, searching for even a flicker of the man who once whispered he loved her. But there was nothing, only cold satisfaction. A murmur spread across the hall. Was it all a setup? She should have known. She's ruined. The whispers stung more than the words shouted aloud. Each one cut another piece of her dignity. Victoria's final blow came swift and sharp. You will stay, Emma. You will smile. You will play the role we give you, because if you don't, we'll make sure the world sees you for what you are. An ungrateful, desperate girl who tricked her way into a family she never deserved. Tears blurred Emma's vision. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but her body was paralyzed by shame. Her mother, trembling but fierce, lifted her chin. You may think you've broken her tonight, Grace said in a steady voice, but you'll see. A day will come when you regret this. The crowd snickered at the old woman's boldness, but Emma felt her mother's hand tighten in hers. In that moment of utter humiliation, a small flame sparked in Emma's heart. She didn't know it yet, but this was the moment her despair began to turn into defiance, and Richard, so sure of his victory, had no idea he had just awakened the one thing he feared most, Emma's will to fight back. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love for you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Through our stories, we build hope and give a future to children and women who have been abused all over the world. Motivate us by subscribing and turning on your notification bell so you never miss a story that matters. Also, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and how did this story speak to you? The honeymoon was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to heal from the ugly scene at the wedding. Emma told herself that Richard had just been drunk, or stressed, or carried away in the moment. Maybe it won't happen again, she thought desperately. But her hopes shattered on the very first night. They arrived at a luxury resort by the sea. The sky was painted with stars, and the sound of waves should have been soothing. Emma walked into the suite with nervous excitement, only to freeze at the sight before her. Sophie was already there. The same Sophie who had smirked at her humiliation during the reception now lounged casually on the couch in a silk robe, a glass of wine in hand. Emma's stomach dropped. What is she doing here? Richard didn't even look ashamed. He kissed Sophie on the lips right in front of her, smirking as if daring Emma to protest. Get used to it, he said flatly. She's part of my life. If you're smart, you'll accept it. Emma's hands trembled. Richard, this is our honeymoon. How can you... Richard cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. Don't play innocent. You know what you are to me. You're not my wife. You're a placeholder, a tool. Sophie is my real partner. Sophie leaned back, her laughter cruel and light. He's right, darling. Don't make yourself sick over this. Some women know how to keep a man's attention, others... She eyed Emma with disdain. Others just sit and cry. Emma's chest burned. She felt her heart splintering all over again, but she stayed silent, her pride barely holding her together. The days that followed were worse than any nightmare. Richard flaunted Sophie everywhere they went, at dinners, at parties, even in public. He kissed her openly, held her hand, whispered in her ear, all while Emma walked behind them like a shadow. One evening, when Emma finally snapped and whispered, "You're humiliating me," Richard laughed in her face. "Humiliating you?" he sneered. "You humiliate me every day by existing. Be grateful I keep you around at all." The torment didn't stop with Richard. Victoria became Emma's daily tormentor. Over breakfast one morning, she spoke sweetly, her words laced with venom. "Men stray, Emma. That's natural. But a smart wife knows her role. Keep quiet, smile, and thank him for not throwing you out." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "But shouldn't marriage be about love? Respect?" Victoria's smile widened, sharp as glass. "Oh, poor child. Love is for equals. Do you think you're his equal? You should be grateful he even lets you sit at the same table." Emma's hands clenched under the tablecloth, her knuckles white. But Victoria's steady gaze crushed her spirit. Slowly, Emma began to doubt herself. Maybe she's right. Maybe I should be grateful. Maybe this is all I deserve. Her confidence drained away day by day, drop by drop, until all that remained was shame. By the time they returned home, the damage was already spreading beyond the family. Rumors flew across town like wildfire. "She's barren," people whispered. "That's why Richard is with Sophie. She trapped him into marriage. So desperate. She's nothing but a joke." Emma tried to call her old friends, hoping for comfort. But one by one they pulled away. Excuses piled up. Busy. Out of town. Maybe another time. The truth was clear. No one wanted to be associated with the woman the powerful Callahan family mocked. Even at the grocery store, Emma felt eyes following her, heard faint giggles when she walked past. She had become the story everyone loved to whisper about, the fool who thought she could climb too high. The only person who still stood beside her was Grace. Her mother clasped her hands one evening and said, "Emma, my child, listen to me. This man will destroy you. His family is poison. You don't have to stay." Emma shook her head, tears falling freely. "Mother, I took vows. I can't just walk away. What will people say?" Grace's eyes filled with pain. "They already say the worst. Don't give them the power to keep you trapped. You still have a choice." But Emma couldn't listen. Shame held her tighter than any chain. Leaving felt like admitting defeat, and she wasn't ready to let go of the dream she had clung to since the beginning. Then, one afternoon, a glimmer of truth broke through the fog. Emma met an old family friend, Thomas, a lawyer who had known her late father. He invited her to his office, concern heavy in his voice. "Emma," he said gently, sliding a folder across his desk. "I don't know if you realize this, but your father left you something. His estate, the land, the accounts, it's all in your name, worth millions." Emma blinked, her heart pounding. "What? That can't be. Richard told me—" Thomas shook his head firmly. "No. Richard's family approached me months before the wedding trying to gain access. I refused. I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't want to hurt you. Emma, you need to understand, this marriage wasn't about love. It was a trap." Emma's blood ran cold. Her mind spun back to the sneers, the humiliation, the cruelty. Suddenly, it all made sense. Richard had never wanted her. He wanted her inheritance. And worse, once he had control, there was no doubt he and Victoria would cast her and Grace aside like trash. That night, Emma sat alone in the dark, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her once bright eyes now looked hollow, her face pale and weary. Richard's words echoed in her mind. "You're not my wife. You're a tool." Victoria's voice followed. "Be grateful he hasn't thrown you out." And finally, Thomas's warning. This was a trap. A chill settled in her bones. For the first time, Emma realized the truth. She wasn't just humiliated. She was in danger, and the people who promised her forever had only been waiting for the perfect moment to destroy her completely. The night of the gala was one Emma would never forget. Not because of beauty, but because of pain. The Callahan family mansion had been decorated like a palace. Crystal chandeliers dripped with light. Golden curtains framed the tall windows, and the air shimmered with perfume and money. Men in sharp suits and women in gowns that looked like moving stars filled the ballroom. Cameras flashed as reporters captured every second of the event. Emma, dressed in a pale silver gown Richard had thrown on her bed that morning, walked in at his side. She had not chosen the dress. She had not chosen to come. But Richard had made it clear. She had no choice. "You will stand beside me tonight," he had ordered. "You will smile when I tell you to smile, and you will stay silent no matter what happens." His grip on her arm as they entered the ballroom felt more like a shackle than a husband's touch. Emma's mother, Grace, had begged her not to go. "Emma, you don't have to let him parade you like this. Stay home with me. Let them play their cruel games without you." But Emma had whispered through trembling lips, "If I don't go, it'll only be worse." Now, as she stood in the grand hall with eyes burning into her, she wondered if she had made the right choice. The evening began as most galas did. Drinks, speeches, laughter that didn't sound real. Emma kept her gaze low, her hands clasped in front of her. She forced herself to smile faintly when people nodded her way, but no one lingered long enough to truly greet her. Then, halfway through the night, Richard called for attention. He tapped his glass with a silver fork, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" The music died down. Conversations fell silent. All eyes turned to him. Emma's stomach twisted. She glanced up at him nervously. Something in his smile told her she was about to be used again. Richard held Sophie's hand as he pulled her forward into the spotlight. Sophie wore a glittering red gown that clung to her like a second skin. She looked radiant, smug, triumphant. Emma felt her heart crack before he even spoke. "This," Richard said loudly, pulling Sophie close, "is the woman I love." The room erupted into gasps, then laughter, then applause. Emma stood frozen, her throat dry. Richard's smile widened. "Yes, you heard me. Sophie is my true love. She has always been the woman beside me, the one who understands me, the one worthy of me." Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder, smirking directly at Emma. "It's true," she purred. "Richard and I belong together." Emma's vision blurred. Her body felt hollow, as if her soul had left it. But Richard wasn't finished. He turned toward her, his voice cold. "And Emma." He gestured toward her like she was a piece of furniture. "Emma is simply my obligation, a mistake, but I'm a man of honor, and so I gave her a place for a while. That ends tonight." The crowd roared with laughter. Some clapped. Some whispered cruel things that reached Emma's ears. "She looks pathetic. Imagine being dumped in public." She should have known better. Emma wanted the ground to open and swallow her. She stood there like a statue, her hands trembling. Her mother, Grace, was at the edge of the room, her face pale with fury. She started forward, but 2 security men blocked her path. "Let me through," she cried. "That's my daughter." Richard waved a lazy hand. "Remove her." "She doesn't belong here." The guards shoved Grace toward the door. She stumbled, nearly falling, but caught herself with dignity. "Emma!" she shouted, her voice breaking. "Don't let them destroy you!" Emma wanted to run to her mother, but Richard's hand clamped down on her arm like iron. "Stay where you are," he hissed. "Don't make a scene, or you'll regret it." The room blurred with laughter and champagne bubbles. Cameras flashed. Emma's humiliation was immortalized in photos that would cover the tabloids the next morning, and the headlines came swiftly. Rejected bride humiliated by husband's true love. Poor girl pretends to belong, gets publicly cast aside. Callahan family wipes away charity case. Every paper, every gossip blog, every social media post turned Emma into a punchline. She couldn't leave the house without seeing her own face mocked in magazines. Strangers online called her desperate, a gold digger, barren, worthless. None of it was true. She never wanted Richard's money. She only ever wanted love. But the lies spread faster than the truth, and soon even neighbors whispered when she walked past. Grace tried to comfort her. She sat by her daughter's bed night after night, holding her hand. "Don't listen to them," she whispered. "You know who you are. You are not what they say." But Emma couldn't fight the shame. She stayed in her room for days, barely eating, barely speaking. She stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe this is who I am. Maybe they're right. One afternoon, Richard stormed into the room, tossing a magazine onto the bed. On the cover was Emma's face, twisted mid-cry at the gala. The headline read, "The wife who never belonged." "Look at you," Richard sneered. "Pathetic. Everyone knows it now. You're nothing without me, and soon even your house won't be yours." Emma frowned weakly. "What do you mean?" He smirked. "You'll see. Just remember, you have no power here. You never did." He left, slamming the door behind him. Emma's stomach churned. His words echoed in her mind. "Even your house won't be yours." What did he mean? The answer came days later from Grace. Grace had been cleaning the study when she found a locked drawer in Richard's desk. Something about it felt wrong. She searched quietly until she found the key taped under the table. Her hands shook as she opened the drawer. Inside, under stacks of papers, she found a folder sealed with her late husband's name. Her breath caught. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The documents revealed everything. Emma was the sole heir to her father's estate, land, assets, accounts, all legally hers. But among the papers was something worse. Copies of forged documents with Emma's forged signature, handing control over to Richard. Grace staggered back, her chest tight. Her late husband's legacy, Emma's inheritance, was what this was all about. Richard and Victoria had planned it from the start. The wedding, the humiliation, the cruelty. It had all been a trap to break Emma until she signed. Grace clutched the papers to her chest. Tears blurred her eyes, but there was also fire in them. For the first time, she realized she wasn't powerless. These documents could expose everything. That night, she sat by Emma's side, the folder hidden under her shawl. "Emma," she said softly, brushing her daughter's hair from her face, "you have to listen to me. You think you're powerless, but you're not. You hold more than you realize." Emma's eyes were empty. "Mother, please. I can't fight them. I can barely breathe." Grace's voice grew firm. "You can, because you're not alone. Look at me." She pulled out the folder, laying the documents on the bed. "Your father left this for you. All of it is yours. Richard forged papers to steal it, but he didn't succeed. Not yet. You're the heir, Emma. You have the power." Emma blinked, confusion flooding her face. "What? No, Richard told me." "Richard lied," Grace said sharply. "From the beginning he lied. He never wanted you. He wanted this, and when he gets it, he will throw you away. Both of us." Emma stared at the documents, her heart pounding. The room spun as truth settled like a weight on her chest. Her whole marriage, her whole life for the past months had been a scheme. Every smile, every kiss, every cruel word, it was all part of a plan. Her lips trembled. "So what do I do, Mother?" "I can't win against them. They have everything." Grace took her hand, her grip steady. "No, Emma. They have money, they have power, they have lies. But you have truth, and truth can destroy them if you're brave enough to use it." Emma's chest heaved as tears rolled down her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, Her eyes had a flicker of something more than despair. She sat up slowly, clutching her mother's hand. "You're right," she whispered. "I've been silent. I let them humiliate me. I gave them my power by saying nothing." Her voice grew stronger. "No more. If silence is what fed them, then I'll use my voice. I'll fight. Not with screams, not with begging, but with strategy." With proof, Grace's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were proud. "That's my girl!" Emma held the documents close to her chest, her heart racing. For the first time since her wedding day, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. And under that hope burned a spark of fire. Richard and Victoria had crushed her dignity, dragged her through ashes. But from ashes, something stronger could rise. And Emma was ready. The Callahan estate glowed like a palace that night. Golden lanterns lined the driveway, and the ballroom sparkled with crystals, roses, and champagne towers. Laughter drifted through the open doors as reporters clicked photos of the couple of the hour, Richard and Sophie. The banner above the stage read, "Celebrating True Love." Emma watched from the shadows outside the entrance, her mother's arm steady around hers. Grace's eyes flicked nervously toward her daughter. "Emma, are you sure about this?" Emma's face was calm, but her voice carried steel. "They wanted to break me in public. Tonight, I'll end them in public together." They stepped into the ballroom. The music faltered. Gasps spread like fire. Heads turned. People whispered, "Is that Emma? She dares show her face? She'll be torn apart." Richard, standing at the center with Sophie at his side, froze when he saw her. His lips curled into a smirk. "Well, look who crawled back." The little beggar who couldn't stay away. Sophie laughed, pressing herself closer to him. "Emma, darling, haven't you had enough humiliation?" Emma didn't flinch. She walked forward with slow, deliberate steps, her silver dress catching the light. Grace followed closely, her chin raised, no longer the trembling woman dragged across a hall. Emma's voice rang clear. "Don't worry, Richard. Tonight isn't about my humiliation. Tonight is about yours." The crowd stirred. Phones lifted discreetly, recording every word. Richard's smirk faltered. "What are you talking about?" Emma reached into her small purse and pulled out a tiny device. She pressed play. Richard's voice filled the ballroom, cold and cruel, captured in perfect clarity. "She's not my wife. She's a tool. Once I get her inheritance, she and her pathetic mother are out." The hall fell silent. Every guest stared at Richard. His face turned pale, then red. That's fake!" he shouted. Emma's calm eyes met his. "It's your voice, Richard, your words, and I'm done being silent." The silence cracked with murmurs. "Did you hear that? He used her. All for money." Emma stepped closer, her voice steady as stone. "But that's not all. Richard tried to forge my signature to steal my father's estate. And he didn't act alone." Gasps. Emma opened her purse again and pulled out the documents Grace had saved, the originals, with the forged copies attached. "Here is proof," Emma declared, holding them high. "Richard forged these with his mother's guidance. Victoria Callahan is the true mastermind behind this trap." All eyes turned to Victoria, her face drained of color. "That's a lie," she hissed. "She's trying to ruin us." But a man in the crowd stepped forward, one of Richard's business partners. He studied the papers, his brow darkening. "These signatures are forged," he said coldly. "I recognize the lawyer's seal. If this is true, you both could face prison." Whispers turned to outrage. Guests pulled away from the Callahans as if they were diseased. A lawyer in the audience began snapping photos of the documents. Richard stammered. "No! She's framing me! You all know Emma! She's nothing. Before he could finish, Sophie yanked her hand from his. She turned on him, her face twisted in disgust. You fool! You promised me everything, and now you're exposed as a liar, a cheat, and a fraud. Do you think I'll go down with you? She ripped off her ring and threw it at his chest. The hall erupted in cheers and gasps. Sophie stormed out, leaving Richard gaping after her. Emma turned to Victoria, whose knees buckled. Grace stepped forward, standing tall before the very crowd that once mocked her. This woman once dragged me across a hall, calling me worthless. Tonight, the world sees the truth. Not weakness, not poverty, but strength. The guests erupted into applause. Some clapped for Emma, some clapped for Grace, others simply laughed at the Callahans' ruin. Richard shouted over the noise, his voice desperate. Emma, you can't do this. Without me, you're nothing. Emma looked at him with calm, burning eyes. Without you, Richard, I am finally free. With that, she turned, linking her arm with her mother's. Together they walked out of the hall, their heads held high.
The rain fell like tears from heaven as Natasha Williams stood at the iron gates of the Mitchell mansion, her heart pounding against her ribs. In her trembling hands, she held an elegant cream-colored invitation that seemed to mock her with its gold lettering. Through the tall windows, she could see people in expensive clothes laughing and raising crystal glasses, their faces twisted with amusement as they pointed toward the entrance where she stood. Mommy, why are those people looking at us like that? Sophie asked, her tiny voice barely audible above the storm. At 5 years old, she was too young to understand the cruelty in their stares, but old enough to sense that something was wrong. Natasha pulled her daughter closer, trying to shield her from both the rain and the harsh reality of their situation. Sophie's new green dress, the nicest thing she owned, was already getting wet despite Natasha's efforts to keep her dry. The dress had cost Natasha 2 weeks of lunch money, but seeing Sophie's excited face when she tried it on had made every sacrifice worth it. They're just surprised to see us, baby, Natasha whispered, her voice catching. She knew better. She had suspected from the moment she found that invitation slipped under her cleaning cart at the office building that something wasn't right. Who would invite a cleaning lady to a millionaire's birthday party? But Sophie had been so excited when Natasha told her about the party. Her daughter had never been to anything fancy before. How could Natasha break her heart by saying they couldn't go? The memory of finding the invitation burned in her mind. She had been cleaning the executive floor of Morrison & Associates, the same floor where Jonathan Mitchell worked. She had seen him countless times, always in his expensive suits, always talking loudly on his phone about deals worth more money than she would see in a lifetime. He had never looked at her directly, never acknowledged her presence as she emptied his trash and cleaned his office windows. Yet somehow this invitation had appeared with her name on it. Ms. Natasha Williams is cordially invited to Jonathan Mitchell's 32nd birthday celebration. The address was for the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, the kind of place where houses had names instead of just numbers. Through the window now she could see Jonathan himself. Tall, handsome, with dark hair perfectly styled, wearing a maroon suit that probably cost more than her rent. He was surrounded by friends who kept glancing toward the entrance and snickering. One of them, a blonde woman in a tight silver dress, was pointing directly at Natasha and Sophie, her mouth moving rapidly as she spoke to the group. Natasha's stomach twisted. She had been right to be suspicious. This was all some kind of sick joke. Mommy, are we going in? Sophie tugged on her mother's red dress, the one Natasha had bought secondhand but altered to fit perfectly. You said there would be cake. The innocence in her daughter's voice nearly broke Natasha's resolve. She could turn around right now, take Sophie home to their small apartment, and pretend this never happened. They could eat microwave dinner and watch cartoons, and Sophie would forget about the fancy party in a few days. But as she looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, something fierce awakened in Natasha's chest. Sophie deserved better than hiding from the world. She deserved to see beautiful things, to experience wonder, to believe that anything was possible. Even if this was a joke, even if they were going to be humiliated, Natasha would not let her daughter grow up thinking they had to accept being treated as less than human. Yes, baby, Natasha said, straightening her shoulders. We're going in. And we're going to hold our heads high. She pressed the intercom button at the gate. A moment later, a crisp voice answered. Name, please? Natasha Williams. I have an invitation. There was a pause, then the sound of muffled laughter in the background. Of course. Please come in. The gates swung open with a soft electronic hum. Natasha took Sophie's small hand in hers and walked up the winding driveway, their footsteps echoing on the wet stone. With every step she could feel eyes on them from the windows above. She could practically hear the whispers, the cruel comments about what they were wearing, where they came from, why they thought they belonged here. But she kept walking. For Sophie. Always for Sophie. The front door was answered by a woman in a black and white uniform who looked at them with barely concealed surprise. "You must be the Williams family?" she stammered. "That's right," Natasha said calmly. "We're here for the party." The woman stepped aside, and they entered a foyer that looked like something from a magazine. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, casting rainbow patterns on the marble floor. A grand staircase curved upward, its polished banister gleaming. Sophie gasped audibly, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like a castle, Mommy," she whispered. "It is beautiful," Natasha agreed, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. They followed the sound of music and laughter to a large room filled with elegantly dressed people. The moment they appeared in the doorway, conversations stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips. All eyes turned toward them with expressions ranging from shock to amusement to barely concealed disgust. In that moment of terrible silence, Natasha realized the full extent of what they had walked into. This wasn't just a joke. This was a trap, designed to humiliate her in front of dozens of wealthy, powerful people. They had invited her here to laugh at her, to remind her of her place in the world. But as she stood there, holding Sophie's hand, something unexpected happened. Instead of shame, she felt strength. Instead of wanting to disappear, she felt proud. She had worked 3 jobs to support her daughter. She had never taken a handout, never given up, never let hardship break her spirit. She had raised a kind, intelligent, beautiful child all on her own. These people with their expensive clothes and cruel hearts had no idea what real strength looked like. And in that moment, as dozens of eyes stared at her with judgment and malice, Natasha Williams decided she would show them. What happens when someone who has nothing to lose meets those who have everything to prove? Will Natasha's courage be enough to protect her daughter from the cruelty of the wealthy elite? Subscribe now to find out how this story of love and transformation unfolds, and let me know in the comments what you think Natasha should do next. 3 days before the party, Natasha had made a decision that would change everything. She stood in front of her tiny bathroom mirror at 5 in the morning, practicing her smile. Sophie was still asleep in the bed they shared in their one-bedroom apartment, her small body curled around a worn teddy bear. "You can do this," Natasha whispered to her reflection. "For Sophie, you can do this." The invitation had haunted her thoughts for a week. She had shown it to Patricia Green, her neighbor and the woman who watched Sophie when Natasha worked her evening cleaning job. Patricia was 62 with silver hair and kind eyes, and she was the closest thing to family that Natasha had. "Honey, this smells like trouble," Patricia had said, adjusting her reading glasses as she examined the elegant cardstock. "Rich folks don't usually invite people like us to their parties unless they want something." "I know," Natasha had replied. "But Sophie heard me talking about it. She's so excited about wearing a fancy dress and seeing a real mansion. How can I disappoint her?" Patricia had studied Natasha's face for a long moment. "You're not just doing this for Sophie, are you? You're doing this for you too. You want to prove something." Natasha hadn't been able to deny it. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being dismissed, tired of cleaning up after people who treated her like she didn't exist. If they wanted to make her a joke, she would show them what a real woman looked like. The dress hunt had taken 2 full days. Natasha had visited every thrift store and consignment shop in the city, looking for something that would make her feel confident. She had found it hanging in the back corner of a small shop downtown, a stunning red dress with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt. The color was rich and vibrant, like crushed velvet or fresh roses. It was exactly her size, as if it had been waiting for her. The price tag made her stomach drop. Even secondhand, it cost more than she usually spent on clothes in 6 months. But when she tried it on, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. The dress hugged her curves perfectly, the color making her dark skin glow. She looked like royalty. "I'll take it," she had told the shop owner, handing over cash she had been saving for Sophie's school supplies. Finding a dress for Sophie had been easier. The little girl looked adorable in everything she tried on, but when she saw herself in a bright green dress with tiny white flowers, she had squealed with delight. "I look like a princess, Mommy." "You are a princess, baby. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." Now, on the morning of the party, Patricia arrived early to help them get ready. She brought her makeup bag and hot rollers, tools that Natasha rarely had time to use. "Sit down, honey," Patricia said, setting up her supplies on the small kitchen table. Let me work my magic. While Patricia worked on Natasha's hair, Sophie sat on the floor playing with her dolls, chattering excitedly about the party. Do you think there will be other kids there, Mommy? Maybe, sweetheart. But even if there aren't, you'll be the most beautiful girl there. Patricia worked carefully, curling Natasha's hair into soft waves that framed her face. She applied makeup with a gentle hand, enhancing Natasha's natural beauty without making her look overdone. Tell me again why you're really doing this, Patricia said quietly so Sophie wouldn't hear. Natasha was quiet for a moment. Because I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of thinking I don't deserve good things. Tired of Sophie growing up thinking we have to hide who we are. And if it's a trap? If they're planning to embarrass you? Then they'll learn that you can't embarrass someone who refuses to be ashamed. Patricia smiled. There's my girl. I've been waiting to see this fire in you. When Patricia finished, Natasha looked in the mirror and gasped. She looked like a completely different person. Her hair fell in glossy waves, her skin glowed, and her eyes sparkled with determination. The red dress fit her like it had been made for her body. Oh honey, Patricia breathed. You look absolutely stunning. Sophie looked up from her dolls and her mouth fell open. Mommy, you look like a movie star. Getting Sophie ready was even more fun. Patricia brushed the little girl's curly hair until it shone, then tied it back with a white ribbon. The green dress made Sophie's eyes look bright and happy. Now for the finishing touches, Patricia said mysteriously. She disappeared into the hallway and returned with a small jewelry box. These belong to my grandmother. I want you to wear them tonight. Inside were delicate pearl earrings and a matching necklace. Natasha's eyes filled with tears. Patricia, I can't take these. Yes, you can. And you will. Sometimes we need armor for battle, and sometimes that armor looks like pearls and red dresses. Natasha hugged her neighbor tightly. Thank you. For everything. Don't thank me yet. Save that for when you come home tonight and tell me how you conquered those rich folks with nothing but class and dignity. As they prepared to leave, Patricia knelt down to Sophie's level. Remember what we talked about, little princess. You hold your head high tonight. You're just as good as anyone else there. Sophie nodded solemnly. I remember, Miss Patricia. Mommy says we're strong and brave. That's right. And beautiful too. They called a taxi, a luxury Natasha rarely allowed herself. But tonight was not a night for taking the bus. As they rode through the city toward the mansion, Sophie pressed her face to the window, watching the buildings get bigger and more impressive. Are we really going to live like this someday, Mommy? Natasha squeezed her daughter's hand. We're going to have everything we need, baby. Everything. The taxi driver kept glancing in his rearview mirror. Finally he spoke. You ladies look like you're heading somewhere special tonight. We are, Natasha replied confidently. Very special. When they arrived at the mansion, Natasha paid the taxi driver and added a generous tip. She could see him watching in amazement as they walked toward the imposing front gate. As they stood in the rain, facing the moment of truth, Natasha felt no regret. Whatever happened tonight, she had shown Sophie that they didn't have to accept being treated as less than worthy. They had dressed up, shown up, and refused to hide. The laughter from inside the house grew louder as more people noticed them at the gate. But Natasha's smile never wavered. She was ready for whatever came next. The massive front door opened to reveal a butler in formal attire, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious surprise in his eyes. Behind him, Natasha could see glimpses of crystal and gold, hear the soft sounds of classical music mixing with expensive laughter. Good evening, ladies, the butler said politely. May I take your coats? Natasha realized they didn't have coats. They had walked from the taxi to the door in the rain, and while her red dress had survived beautifully, Sophie's green dress showed tiny water spots that somehow made her look even more adorable. We're fine, thank you, Natasha replied with dignity. We're here for Jonathan Mitchell's party. Of course. Right this way. As they followed him through a hallway lined with oil paintings and sculptures, Sophie's head swiveled back and forth, trying to take in everything at once. Her small hand gripped Natasha's tightly, whether from excitement or nervousness, it was hard to tell. Mommy, she whispered, why is everything so shiny? Because some people like shiny things, baby, Natasha whispered back. But remember, the most beautiful things aren't always the most expensive ones. The butler led them to the entrance of a grand ballroom. The moment they appeared in the doorway, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A waiter carrying champagne glasses actually paused with his tray halfway to a table. The string quartet in the corner kept playing, but their music seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Natasha had expected this moment, but experiencing it was different than imagining it. She felt every pair of eyes in the room focused on her, and Sophie felt the weight of their judgment, their surprise, their barely concealed amusement. But instead of shrinking, she stood taller. Sophie, bless her heart, waved at the room full of strangers with the enthusiasm of a 5-year-old who believed everyone was her friend. "Hello," she called out cheerfully. "I'm Sophie and this is my mommy." A few people actually smiled despite themselves. Children had a way of breaking through adult pretenses, and Sophie's genuine joy was infectious. Jonathan Mitchell stood across the room in his expensive maroon suit, a glass of champagne frozen halfway to his lips. Natasha could see the recognition dawning on his face, followed quickly by what looked like panic. He whispered something urgently to the blonde woman beside him, who Natasha now recognized as Rebecca Torres from the society pages. Rebecca's response was loud enough to carry across the room. Well, look what the storm dragged in." The cruelty in her voice made several people glance at her with disapproval, but it also seemed to give others permission to start talking again. The whispers began immediately. "Who are they? How did they get an invitation? Someone's idea of a joke, surely? That dress is actually quite stunning on her. The little girl is adorable." Natasha heard it all, but she didn't let it affect her composure. Instead, she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a small, apologetic smile, but a radiant, confident smile that seemed to light up her entire face. "Sophie," she said in a voice that carried clearly across the room, "what do you say when someone invites you to their home?" "Thank you for having us," Sophie said loudly, still waving. "Your house is so pretty." An older woman with silver hair and kind eyes detached herself from a group near the fireplace and approached them. She was elegant in a navy blue dress, with pearls that looked real and expensive, but her smile was warm and genuine. "Hello, dear," she said to Sophie. "I'm Catherine. What a beautiful dress you're wearing." "Thank you. Mommy bought it special for the party. She said green is good for my eyes." "Your mommy is absolutely right. And might I say," Catherine turned to Natasha, "you look absolutely radiant tonight. That red is perfect on you." "Thank you so much," Natasha replied, accepting the kindness gratefully. "You're very kind. And thank you for including us tonight." Catherine's eyes showed a flicker of confusion, as if she wasn't quite sure what Natasha was referring to, but she didn't ask questions. Instead, she continued the conversation gracefully. "Would you like me to introduce you to some people? I think there are several children here tonight who would love to meet Sophie." Before Natasha could answer, Rebecca Torres appeared beside them, her silver dress catching the light from the chandelier above. Her smile was sharp as a blade. "Catherine, darling, I don't think you've been properly introduced. This is..." She paused dramatically, "the cleaning lady from Jonathan's office building. And her daughter." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Natasha felt the familiar sting of being reduced to her job, to her economic status, to her place in other people's minds. But she also felt Sophie's hand squeeze hers, and she remembered why she was here. "I'm Natasha Williams," she said calmly, extending her hand to Catherine. "And this is my daughter, Sophie. It's a pleasure to meet you." Catherine shook Natasha's hand warmly, her eyes flashing with anger at Rebecca's rudeness. "The pleasure is mine entirely. And may I say, any mother who raises such a polite, delightful child is clearly doing something very right." "Indeed," came a new voice. A distinguished man with graying hair approached their group. "Thomas Mitchell, Jonathan's father. Charmed to meet you both." Natasha shook his hand as well, noting that his grip was firm and respectful. "Thank you for having us in your beautiful home, Mr. Mitchell. Please call me Thomas. And might I say that's a stunning dress. Red is definitely your color." Rebecca's expression grew more sour by the minute. This wasn't going according to whatever plan she had imagined. The guests weren't pointing and laughing. Instead, people seemed genuinely charmed by Sophie and impressed by Natasha's grace under pressure. Across the room, Jonathan finally seemed to break free from his paralysis. He began walking toward them, his expression unreadable. Several people watched his approach, clearly sensing that some kind of confrontation was about to occur. "Jonathan," Thomas called out as his son approached. "Come meet the Williams family. Delightful people." Jonathan reached their group and stopped directly in front of Natasha. For a moment they simply looked at each other. She could see guilt warring with surprise in his eyes, could practically feel the struggle going on behind his carefully composed expression. "Ms. Williams," he said finally, his voice formal. "Thank you for coming." Thank you for inviting us, Natasha replied evenly. Sophie has been looking forward to this all week. Sophie, who had been remarkably patient during all the adult conversation, suddenly tugged on Jonathan's sleeve. Mr. Jonathan? Is this really your birthday party? Jonathan looked down at her, and something in his expression softened. Yes, it is. Then happy birthday, Sophie said brightly. I hope you get lots of nice presents. That's very sweet of you. Thank you. Mommy brought you a card, Sophie announced before Natasha could stop her. She made me practice writing my name in it 10 times. Natasha felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had indeed brought a card, a simple one from the drugstore with a heartfelt message inside. It had seemed appropriate when she was preparing, but now, surrounded by all this wealth and sophistication, it felt inadequate. But Catherine's face lit up. How thoughtful. Jonathan, when was the last time someone took the time to write you a personal note? Jonathan's eyes met Natasha's again, and she saw something shift in their depths. It's been a very long time. Natasha reached into her small purse and pulled out the card. It was in a simple white envelope with Jonathan's name written in her careful handwriting. It's nothing fancy, she said quietly. I'm sure it's perfect, he replied, taking it from her with unexpected gentleness. As Jonathan opened the card, Rebecca stepped closer, clearly hoping to see something she could criticize. But when he read it, his expression changed completely. His eyes widened, then softened, and a genuine smile spread across his face. What does it say? Rebecca demanded. Jonathan looked up at Natasha with something that might have been wonder. It says, Dear Jonathan, may this new year of your life bring you joy, friendship, and the kind of happiness that comes from knowing you're loved for who you are, not what you have. Happy birthday. Natasha and Sophie Williams. The sincerity of the message, so different from the expensive but impersonal gifts he usually received, seemed to affect him deeply. For the first time since they had arrived, he looked at Natasha not as an intruder or a joke, but as a person. That's beautiful, Catherine said softly. Absolutely beautiful. Even some of the people nearby who had overheard seemed moved by the simple kindness of the gesture. Rebecca, however, looked like she had tasted something bitter. How quaint, she said with barely concealed venom. But her attempt to diminish the moment fell flat. Jonathan was still looking at Natasha with an expression she couldn't quite read, and Sophie was still beaming at everyone around her, and Catherine was asking Sophie about her favorite subjects in school. For the first time since entering the mansion, Natasha began to hope that maybe, just maybe, this evening might turn out differently than she had expected. Jonathan excused himself from the group, claiming he needed to greet other guests, but in reality he needed air. He stepped onto the marble terrace overlooking the garden, the cool evening breeze helping to clear his head. The card from Natasha and Sophie was still in his hand, and he read it again, feeling shame wash over him like a cold wave. 2 weeks ago, he had been having drinks with his college friends at their usual Friday night spot. Rebecca had been there, as she always was, hanging on his every word and laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. His friend Marcus, a bond trader with more money than sense, had been complaining about his office building's cleaning staff. They're everywhere, Marcus had said, gesturing dramatically with his martini glass. Like invisible people. They clean around you while you're working late, but they never say anything. It's creepy. Maybe they're just trying to be respectful, Jonathan's friend Liam had suggested. Liam was the only one in their group who had grown up middle class, and he sometimes served as their collective conscience. Please, Rebecca had scoffed. They don't talk because they know their place. What would they have to say to us anyway? That's when Marcus had the idea that now made Jonathan sick to his stomach. You know what would be hilarious? If someone invited one of them to a party. Can you imagine? Some cleaning lady showing up to a society event. That's cruel, Marcus, Liam had said. It's funny, Rebecca had insisted. Jonathan, didn't you say there's a cleaner at your building who acts like she's too good to even look at you? Jonathan had been drunk, frustrated by a bad day at work, and surrounded by people who expected him to be the center of attention. Yeah, there's this one woman. Pretty, but she acts like I'm invisible. Never even says hello. Perfect. Marcus had clapped his hands together. Invite her to your birthday party. We'll all get a good laugh when she shows up in some bargain store dress, realizes she doesn't belong and leaves. That's horrible, Liam had protested. It's harmless fun, Rebecca had countered. It's not like anyone will get hurt. She'll just realize how ridiculous the idea was and leave. The alcohol and peer pressure had clouded Jonathan's judgment. The next Monday, he had slipped the invitation under Natasha's cleaning cart while she was in another office. He had told himself it was just a harmless prank, that she probably wouldn't even come, that no one would really get hurt. But watching her tonight, seeing the grace with which she handled Rebecca's cruelty, reading the sincere kindness in her handwritten card, Jonathan realized how wrong he had been. This wasn't harmless. He had tried to humiliate a hard-working single mother for the entertainment of his wealthy friends. And then there was Sophie. The little girl's joy and innocence had cut through his defenses like a knife. She was genuinely excited to be here, genuinely grateful for the invitation, genuinely kind to everyone she met. She had no idea that her presence here was supposed to be a joke. Through the terrace doors, Jonathan could see Natasha talking with his mother, who seemed genuinely charmed by both Natasha and Sophie. His father, who rarely showed interest in anyone outside their social circle, was crouched down to Sophie's level, listening intently as she told him about her favorite books. Jonathan. He turned to find Liam approaching, carrying 2 glasses of wine. "You look like you could use this," Liam said, offering him a glass. "I'm a terrible person," Jonathan said without preamble. "Yes, you are. But you don't have to stay that way." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both watching the scene inside. Natasha was now surrounded by several of the women from the party, who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. She was handling their questions with poise, neither apologizing for her circumstances nor trying to pretend she was something she wasn't. "She's not what I expected," Jonathan admitted. "What did you expect? A stereotype? A caricature you could laugh at?" Jonathan flinched. "I don't know. I never really thought about her as a real person before." "Isn't that awful?" "Yes, it is. But recognizing it is the first step." "Look at her," Jonathan said quietly. "She's more gracious and dignified than anyone else in that room. And Sophie. God, Liam, she's beautiful. She's smart and funny and kind, and I invited them here as a joke. So what are you going to do about it?" Before Jonathan could answer, Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her expression stormy. "There you are. People are asking questions about your mysterious guest. How long are you going to let this charade continue?" "It's not a charade, Rebecca." "Of course it is. That's the whole point. Although I have to admit she cleaned up better than I expected. That dress is actually quite nice, though obviously not designer." Jonathan turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her step back. "Stop talking," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I said stop talking. About Natasha, about Sophie, about their clothes, about their circumstances. Just stop." Rebecca's mouth fell open. "Jonathan, what's gotten into you? This was your idea. And it was a terrible idea. A cruel, thoughtless, terrible idea." "But we're not actually hurting anyone," Rebecca protested. "It's not like we're going to be mean to them. We'll just let them enjoy the party and then they'll leave and everything will go back to normal." "You've already been mean to them, Rebecca. You introduced Natasha as the cleaning lady, like that's all she is. You made it clear you think they don't belong here. They don't belong here." Liam stepped forward. "Maybe the question isn't whether they belong here, but whether we deserve to be in the same room as them." Through the doors, they could see Catherine introducing Natasha to more guests. Thomas was showing Sophie the art collection, patiently explaining the history of each painting as she listened with fascination. "Your parents seem to like them," Liam observed. Jonathan watched his father's face as he talked to Sophie. Thomas Mitchell was not an easy man to impress. He had built his business empire through shrewd judgment and careful assessment of character. Yet here he was, completely charmed by a 5-year-old in a green dress from a discount store. "Mom always wanted grandchildren," Jonathan said quietly. "She's been after me for years to settle down and start a family. And now here's this adorable little girl who thinks you hung the moon just for inviting her to your birthday party." The guilt hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Sophie's excited wave when she saw him, her sincere birthday wishes, her mother's thoughtful card, all of it based on what she believed was a genuine invitation from someone who wanted her there. "I have to tell them," Jonathan said suddenly. "I have to tell them the truth." "Jonathan, no," Rebecca said quickly. "That will make it worse. They're having a good time. Just let them enjoy the evening and leave it at that." "She's right," Liam said reluctantly. "Telling them now would be worse than the original prank. It would humiliate them in front of everyone." Jonathan watched as Sophie threw her head back and laughed at something his father said. The sound was pure joy, untainted by any knowledge of the cruel circumstances that had brought her here. "Then what do I do?" "You figure out how to make this right," Liam said simply. "You figure out how to turn a cruel joke into something real." Inside, the party continued. But Jonathan remained on the terrace, holding a card written by a woman he had tried to humiliate, watching his parents fall in love with a little girl who deserved so much more than the world had given her, and trying to figure out how to become the kind of man who deserved their forgiveness. The evening was far from over, and Jonathan was beginning to realize that whatever happened next would define not just this night, but the kind of person he chose to be for the rest of his life. The evening had been progressing beautifully for nearly 2 hours. Natasha found herself genuinely enjoying the conversations with other guests, many of whom seemed surprised but pleased to discover her intelligence and warmth. Sophie had made friends with Catherine's sister's grandchildren, who were visiting for the party, and the sound of children's laughter filled the mansion's halls. Jonathan had rejoined the party, but Natasha noticed he seemed different. Less confident, more thoughtful. He kept glancing at her and Sophie with an expression she couldn't quite read. Several times he seemed like he wanted to approach them, but then changed his mind and walked away. It was Rebecca who finally shattered the peaceful evening. Natasha was standing near the dessert table, helping Sophie choose between chocolate cake and strawberry tart, when Rebecca's voice cut through the gentle party chatter like broken glass. "Oh, this is just too perfect," Rebecca announced loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "I simply have to share this with everyone." A hush fell over the room. Catherine, who had been chatting with other guests nearby, turned with a worried expression. Thomas frowned from across the room. Jonathan, who had been talking with Liam near the fireplace, went completely still. "Rebecca, don't," Jonathan said quietly, but his voice carried across the suddenly silent room. "Don't what, darling?" Rebecca smiled sweetly, but her eyes were cold. "Don't tell everyone about your brilliant practical joke? Don't explain how you invited the cleaning lady and her daughter here as a prank to entertain us all." The words hit the room like a bomb. Gasps echoed from several guests. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth in horror. Thomas's face darkened with anger. But it was Sophie's reaction that broke everyone's heart. The little girl looked up at her mother with confused eyes, a forkful of cake halfway to her mouth. "Mommy, what does that mean? What's a practical joke?" Natasha felt the world tilt around her. The beautiful evening, the kindness she had experienced, the hope that maybe she had been wrong about the invitation. All of it crumbled in an instant. She had been right from the beginning. This had all been a cruel game, and she and Sophie were the entertainment. The shame was overwhelming, but not for the reasons Rebecca probably expected. Natasha wasn't ashamed of who she was or what she did for a living. She was ashamed that she had allowed herself to hope. She was ashamed that she had brought Sophie into this situation. She was ashamed that she had let her guard down and believed, even for a moment, that people like Jonathan Mitchell could see people like her as anything more than a source of amusement. "Mommy?" Sophie's voice was smaller now, uncertain. She could sense the change in the room, the tension, the way all the adults were looking at them with pity or embarrassment. Natasha knelt down to Sophie's level, her hand steady despite the storm raging inside her. "Sweetheart, we need to go home now." "But we just got cake," Sophie protested. "And Mr. Thomas was going to show me the library." "I know, baby. But it's time to leave." Natasha stood and faced the room full of people who now knew exactly what she was. The butt of a joke, a poor woman who had been foolish enough to think she belonged in their world. But instead of hanging her head in shame, she lifted her chin higher. "Thank you all for a lovely evening," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Sophie and I will see ourselves out." "Natasha, wait," Catherine stepped forward, her face stricken. "I had no idea. This is not how we... Please don't leave like this. Mrs. Mitchell, you've been nothing but kind to us. But your son invited us here as a joke, and the joke is over. It's time for us to go." Jonathan finally moved, crossing the room quickly. "Natasha, please let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Natasha replied calmly. "You wanted to see how the cleaning lady would look in your fancy house. Now you know. The answer is, exactly like herself." Sophie was looking back and forth between the adults, her young mind trying to process what was happening. "Mommy, did we do something wrong?" "No, baby," Natasha said firmly. "We did nothing wrong. Sometimes people aren't as kind as they seem, but that's their problem, not ours." "But I wanted to play more with the other children," Sophie said, tears starting to form in her eyes. The sight of Sophie crying seemed to galvanize the room. Several people stepped forward, their faces showing genuine distress at the child's tears. "This is outrageous," Thomas said, his voice booming. "Rebecca Torres, I want you out of my house immediately." "Thomas, I was just trying to..." "Out," Thomas roared. "How dare you upset a child in my home?" Catherine approached Natasha with tears in her eyes. "Please, dear, don't let Rebecca's cruelty ruin your evening. Stay. Let Sophie play with the children." Let us show you that not everyone here is heartless. Yes, stay, called out one of the other guests. This party was getting boring anyway. You two are the most interesting people here. Please don't go because of me, Jonathan said quietly. I'm the one who should leave. I'm the one who did something unforgivable. Natasha looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected, genuine remorse. His face was pale, his eyes filled with what looked like real regret. But remorse didn't undo the humiliation. It didn't erase the fact that Sophie was now crying in confusion and disappointment. Mr. Jonathan? Sophie approached him, wiping her eyes. Did you really not want us at your party? Jonathan knelt down to her level, his voice thick with emotion. Sophie, I made a terrible mistake. I was wrong and I'm sorry. But why? Sophie asked with the devastating honesty of a child. We were having fun. I thought you liked us. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, there were tears there. I do like you. I like you and your mother very much. More than I've ever liked anyone at any of my parties. Then why did you invite us as a joke? The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room was watching, waiting to see how Jonathan would answer a 5-year-old's simple, heartbreaking question. Because I was stupid, Jonathan said finally. Because I didn't know you yet. Because I thought things that weren't true and weren't fair. And because I forgot that the most important thing about a person isn't how much money they have or where they live. It's how kind they are. And you and your mother are the kindest people I've ever met. Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a child processing a major life lesson. My mommy says everyone makes mistakes sometimes. Your mommy is very wise. She also says when you make a mistake, you should try to fix it. Jonathan looked up at Natasha, who was watching this exchange with a mixture of pain and wonder. How do I fix this, Sophie? How do I fix hurting you and your mother? Sophie thought for a moment, then brightened. You could have another party. A real one this time, where you invite us because you want us there. The simplicity of her solution, the innocence of her forgiveness, left many of the adults in the room wiping their eyes. Would you come? Jonathan asked, looking between Sophie and Natasha. Would you give me another chance to do this right? Natasha hesitated. The hurt was still raw, the humiliation still fresh. But looking at Sophie's hopeful face, at Jonathan's genuine remorse, at the faces of the other guests who seemed genuinely distressed by what had happened, she found herself wanting to believe in second chances. I don't know, she said honestly. This hurt Jonathan. Not just me but Sophie. She was so excited about coming here, about being included. Do you understand what it means to a little girl to think someone important wants her at their party? I'm beginning to, Jonathan said quietly. And I want to spend the rest of the evening making it up to both of you if you'll let me. Natasha looked around the room at the faces watching them. Catherine with her kind eyes and obvious regret, Thomas with his protective anger on Sophie's behalf, the other guests who seemed genuinely moved by Sophie's tears and Jonathan's apology. What do you think, Sophie? She asked her daughter. Do you want to stay a little longer? Sophie nodded eagerly, her tears already forgotten in the way of resilient children. Can we still have cake? Yes, Jonathan said, his voice rough with emotion. You can have all the cake you want. And I promise, everything from now on is real. No more jokes, no more tricks. Just people getting to know each other. As Sophie scampered back to the dessert table, her green dress bright against the elegant backdrop, Natasha felt something shift in her chest. Maybe second chances were possible after all. Maybe this night wasn't over yet. After Rebecca's dramatic exit and Jonathan's public apology, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted completely. The formal party energy transformed into something warmer, more genuine. It was as if Rebecca's cruelty had cleared the air, allowing everyone to drop their social masks and connect as real people. Catherine took charge immediately, announcing to the remaining guests that this was now a celebration of second chances and new friendships. The string quartet was dismissed in favor of Sophie's request for happy music. And someone's phone connected to the sound system began playing upbeat songs that made the children giggle and dance. Jonathan approached Natasha hesitantly as she watched Sophie twirl around the marble floor with the other children, her green dress spinning like a flower in the wind. May I talk with you privately? He asked. I understand if you'd rather not, but I feel like I owe you a real explanation. Natasha studied his face. The arrogant confidence she had noticed when cleaning his office was gone, replaced by something more vulnerable and genuine. 5 minutes, she agreed. They stepped onto the terrace where Jonathan had spent so much time earlier that evening, wrestling with his conscience. The garden lights created a soft glow, and the sound of Sophie's laughter drifted through the open doors. I don't know how to excuse what I did, Jonathan began. I won't even try. But I want you to understand that seeing you tonight, getting to know you and Sophie, it's changed something in me. What kind of something? Natasha asked quietly. Jonathan leaned against the stone railing, choosing his words carefully. I've lived my whole life surrounded by wealth and privilege, but I never really thought about what that meant. I never considered that there were people like you out there, working hard, raising beautiful children, being kind to everyone they meet, and getting no recognition for any of it. People like me? There was an edge to Natasha's voice. I don't mean that the way it sounds, Jonathan said quickly. I mean people with character. People with strength. People who know what really matters in life. Natasha was quiet for a moment, watching the lights reflect on the garden's fountain. Do you know what my biggest fear was about coming tonight? That people would be cruel to you? No. I expected that. My biggest fear was that Sophie would be hurt. That she would see how some people look at us and start to believe their judgment. Jonathan felt the weight of her words. And I made that fear come true. For a moment, yes. But you also showed her something else. You showed her that people can change, that they can admit when they're wrong, and that sometimes the most important thing is not how you start but how you choose to continue. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the party continuing inside. Through the windows, they could see Catherine reading a story to Sophie and the other children, all of them gathered around her chair like flowers turning toward the sun. Tell me about your life, Jonathan said suddenly. The real version, not what people assume. Natasha looked at him with surprise. Why do you want to know? Because I spent years seeing you as invisible, and now I realize you might be the most interesting person I've ever met. Something in his sincerity made Natasha's defenses lower slightly. It's not very glamorous. I work 3 jobs to pay for our small apartment. I clean office buildings at night, work at a diner during the day, and do bookkeeping for a small shop on weekends. That's incredible. How do you manage all that and still raise Sophie? My neighbor Patricia helps a lot. She watches Sophie when I work nights. And Sophie, she's remarkably understanding for a 5-year-old. She knows mommy works hard so we can have what we need. What do you dream about? Jonathan asked. When you have time to dream. Natasha smiled softly. I dream about Sophie having opportunities one never had. I dream about her going to college, traveling, meeting interesting people, having choices. I dream about her never having to clean someone else's office just to pay rent. What about dreams for yourself? My dreams are for Sophie. That's what being a mother means. Jonathan watched her face as she spoke about her daughter, seeing the fierce love and determination there. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her. She makes everything worth it. Inside, Catherine was now teaching the children a dance, and Sophie's delighted squeals could be heard clearly. Thomas had joined them, looking ridiculous and wonderful as he tried to keep up with the children's energy. My parents seem smitten with her, Jonathan observed. She has that effect on people. Sophie believes everyone is her friend until proven otherwise. Smart approach to life. Is it? Natasha asked. Tonight suggests that might be naive. Jonathan turned to face her fully. No, it suggests that some of us need to work harder to deserve that kind of trust. There was something in his voice that made Natasha really look at him for the first time. Without the shield of his wealth and social position, without the context of master and servant that had defined their previous interactions, she could see him more clearly. He was handsome, yes, but there was also intelligence in his eyes, and what appeared to be genuine regret for his actions. Why did you really invite me? She asked. The real reason, not the party explanation. Jonathan was quiet for a long time. Honestly? Because I noticed you. When I was working late, I would watch you clean and you moved through the office like you owned it. You had this dignity. This presence. It irritated me. Irritated you? Because I couldn't ignore you the way I ignored everyone else. You made me aware that there was a whole world of people I'd never bothered to see. And that made me uncomfortable. So you decided to humiliate me. I decided to prove to myself that you were just like everyone else in service positions. Grateful, subservient, easily put in your place. He shook his head. I was wrong about everything. Natasha considered this. And now? Now I'm wondering if you might give me a chance to get to know you properly. The right way. As equals. We're not equals, Jonathan. You have millions of dollars and I have 3 jobs. Money doesn't make someone superior. Tonight proved that. Through the windows, they could see Sophie now sitting on Thomas's lap while he showed her pictures on his phone. Catherine was bringing her a fresh glass of juice and a second piece of cake. She's going to be impossible to get to sleep tonight, Natasha said with a smile. Let her be excited. When was the last time she had a night like this? Never, Natasha admitted. This is all new for her. Then we should make sure it's perfect. The way he said we made Natasha's heart skip slightly. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that this doesn't have to end when the party is over. I'm suggesting that maybe Sophie would like to see the library my father mentioned. Maybe she would like to come back sometime and swim in our pool. Maybe you would like to see what it feels like to be treated the way you deserve to be treated. Natasha felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for Sophie but for herself. I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? Because we come from different worlds, Jonathan. Because eventually, the novelty will wear off and you'll remember that I'm the cleaning lady. You're not the cleaning lady. You're Natasha Williams. You're Sophie's mother. You're an intelligent, strong, beautiful woman who deserves so much more than the world has given you. The sincerity in his voice took her breath away. You don't know me. Then let me get to know you. Please. Inside, Sophie had apparently told some kind of story that was making all the adults laugh. The sound of genuine joy filled the mansion, replacing the earlier formal politeness with something real and warm. She really is wonderful, Jonathan said, watching Sophie gesture dramatically as she continued her tale. She is. And she's been through enough disappointment for one lifetime. I won't let anyone hurt her again. I understand. But what if instead of hurting her, someone wanted to give her everything she's never had? What if someone wanted to give both of you everything you've never had? Natasha looked at him sharply. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't make promises lightly. And I don't trust easily. They looked at each other for a long moment, the weight of the evening's revelations hanging between them. Then Sophie's voice called out from inside. Mommy? Mr. Thomas says he has books with pictures of real castles. Can we go see? Natasha smiled. We should go back inside. Sophie's probably wondering where I am. Of course. Jonathan held the door open for her. But Natasha? This conversation isn't over. As they rejoined the party, Natasha felt something she hadn't felt in years. The possibility that her carefully controlled world might be about to change in ways she had never dared to imagine. The following Monday morning brought a surprise that Natasha never could have anticipated. She was in the middle of her usual cleaning routine on the executive floor when Catherine Mitchell stepped out of the elevator, looking elegant in a navy blue business suit. Natasha, dear, do you have a moment? Natasha set down her cleaning supplies, suddenly self-conscious in her work uniform. Of course, Mrs. Mitchell. Is everything all right? Everything is wonderful. Could we talk in the conference room? I have a proposition for you. Curious and slightly nervous, Natasha followed Catherine into the glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city. Catherine gestured for her to sit at the polished table that Natasha had cleaned countless times but never sat at. First, I want to apologize again for Saturday night, Catherine began. What Rebecca did was unforgivable, and I'm ashamed that it happened in our home. Mrs. Mitchell, you were nothing but kind to Sophie and me. You have nothing to apologize for. I raised Jonathan to be better than that. His father and I are both horrified by his behavior. He seemed genuinely sorry, Natasha said carefully. Catherine smiled. He is. In fact, he's been calling me every day since Saturday, asking how he can make things right. But that's not why I'm here. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Natasha, I've been thinking about our conversation Saturday night. You mentioned that you work 3 jobs and dream of better opportunities for Sophie. Yes, ma'am. I own a chain of boutique hotels. We're expanding, and I need someone to oversee the housekeeping and facility management for all our properties. It's a management position that would require someone with experience in cleaning and maintenance, but also someone with intelligence, integrity, and leadership skills. Natasha's heart began to race. I'm not sure I understand. I'm offering you a job, dear. A real job with benefits, vacation time, and a salary that would allow you to quit your other positions. You'd have your own office, a company car, and the opportunity to build a real career. The room seemed to spin slightly. Natasha gripped the edge of the table. Mrs. Mitchell, I appreciate the kindness, but I can't accept charity. This isn't charity, Catherine said firmly. This is business. I need someone I can trust to maintain the standards that made my hotel successful. Saturday night showed me exactly the kind of person you are. You handled a difficult situation with more grace than anyone else in that room. You raised a remarkable daughter while working multiple jobs and never once complained or made excuses. Those are exactly the qualities I need in a manager. Natasha stared at the folder Catherine had placed in front of her. What would this job involve? You'd oversee housekeeping staff at 6 hotels, manage facility maintenance schedules, handle vendor relationships, and report directly to me. You'd start at $60,000 a year with performance bonuses and full benefits. $60,000. More than Natasha made from all 3 of her jobs combined. She thought about Sophie, about the tiny apartment they shared, about the dreams she had pushed aside because they seemed impossible. I don't have management experience, Natasha said quietly. You've been managing your entire life, dear. You manage 3 jobs, single parenthood, a household, and you do it all with remarkable efficiency. The hotel business can be taught. Character cannot. Mrs. Mitchell, this is incredibly generous, but I have to ask. Is this because of Jonathan? Because of what happened Saturday? Catherine's expression grew serious. Jonathan doesn't know I'm here. This decision has nothing to do with him and everything to do with you. However, I will say that watching you interact with my family Saturday night reminded me of what I value most. Kindness, authenticity, and strength of character. You have all 3 in abundance. Natasha opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a formal job description, a benefits package, and a salary offer that seemed almost too good to be true. There's one more thing, Catherine continued. The position comes with a company apartment. Nothing fancy, but a nice 2-bedroom in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. Schools? Natasha's voice was barely a whisper. Sophie would be in the district for Riverside Elementary. I believe it's rated as one of the best in the city. Natasha closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten. Riverside Elementary was the school she drove past every morning on her way to work, the one with the beautiful playground and the art displayed in the windows. She had always wondered what it would be like for Sophie to attend a school like that. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Natasha. Catherine reached across the table and touched her hand gently. Sometimes when life offers us a gift, the kindest thing we can do is accept it gracefully. As Catherine left, Natasha sat alone in the conference room, staring at the job offer that could change everything. Through the window, she could see the building where Sophie's current daycare was located, cramped and underfunded but the best she could afford. She thought about their tiny apartment with its thin walls and broken air conditioning. She thought about the nights she stayed awake worrying about bills, about Sophie's future, about what would happen if one of her jobs disappeared. Her phone rang. It was Patricia. Honey, how was your morning? Patricia, Natasha's voice was unsteady. Something incredible just happened. She told her neighbor about Catherine's offer, about the salary, the apartment, the school district. Sweet Lord, Patricia breathed. Natasha, this is your chance. This is Sophie's chance. But what if it's too good to be true? What if there are strings attached? What if there aren't? What if sometimes good things happen to good people? That evening, Natasha sat with Sophie at their small kitchen table, helping her with homework while trying to process the day's events. Sophie was struggling with a math problem, her small face scrunched in concentration. Mommy, if someone gives you something really nice, what do you say? Thank you, Natasha replied automatically, then realized the deeper truth in her daughter's innocent question. And if someone offers to help you, what do you do? Natasha looked at her daughter's earnest face. You accept it gratefully, right? Sophie beamed. Because that's polite. From the mouths of babes, Natasha thought. Maybe it really was that simple. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Jonathan. I got your number from the building directory. I hope that's okay. I wanted to see how you and Sophie are doing after Saturday. Natasha stared at the message for a long moment before responding. We're both fine. Thank you for asking. Would you and Sophie like to have dinner this week? Somewhere family-friendly. My treat, of course. That's very kind, but you don't owe us anything. This isn't about owing. This is about wanting to spend time with 2 people who made my birthday party the best one I've ever had. Natasha felt that flutter of hope again, the dangerous feeling that maybe, just maybe, good things really could happen to people like her. Let me think about it, she typed back. Of course. And Natasha? Whatever you decide, I want you to know that meeting you and Sophie has changed my perspective on everything. Are you wondering what Natasha will decide? Will she take the job that could transform her and Sophie's lives? Will she give Jonathan a chance to prove he's changed? The answers might surprise you. Don't forget to subscribe to see how this heartwarming story unfolds, and leave a comment below telling me what you think Natasha should do next. That night, as Sophie slept beside her in their shared bed, Natasha lay awake staring at the ceiling. In her hands, she held Catherine's job offer and Jonathan's text message. 2 opportunities for a different life. 2 chances to say yes to something better. For the first time in years, Natasha allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she and Sophie deserved all the good things the world had to offer. And maybe it was time to stop being afraid to accept them. Natasha called Catherine the next morning and accepted the job offer. The relief in her voice when she said, yes, surprised even her. Within a week, she had given notice at her 3 jobs, packed their few belongings, and moved with Sophie into a bright, cheerful apartment in the Riverside district. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of a well-maintained building, with a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. Sophie's bedroom had windows that let in morning sunlight, and for the first time in her 5 years she had her own bed, her own desk, her own space to spread out her books and toys. "Mommy, is this really ours?" Sophie asked for the 10th time, running her small hands along the smooth kitchen counters. "Yes, baby. This is really ours. And I can go to the school with the pretty playground? You start Monday." Sophie threw her arms around Natasha's waist, squeezing tight. "This is the best thing that ever happened to us." Natasha hugged her daughter close, thinking that Sophie might be right. Jonathan had texted several times during the week, asking how the move was going and if they needed anything. Natasha had been polite but cautious in her responses. Then, on Friday evening, he sent a different kind of message. "There's a children's science museum downtown that I thought Sophie might enjoy. Would you both like to go Saturday afternoon? No pressure, just a suggestion." Natasha stared at the text for several minutes. Sophie was playing in her new room, arranging her small collection of books on the built-in shelves. The sound of her daughter's contentment made the decision easier. "Sophie would love that," she typed back. "What time?" Saturday afternoon found them standing outside the Science Discovery Center, Sophie practically vibrating with excitement in her bright blue dress. Natasha wore a yellow sundress she had bought with her first paycheck from Catherine's company, feeling more relaxed and confident than she had in years. Jonathan arrived exactly on time, wearing jeans and a casual shirt instead of his usual business attire. The difference was striking. He looked younger, more approachable, more like someone she could actually imagine spending time with. "Hi, Sophie," he called out, crouching down to her level. "Are you ready to explore some science?" "Yes. Mommy says there are dinosaurs inside." "There are. And experiments and a planetarium where we can see the stars." As they walked through the museum entrance, Natasha was surprised by how natural Jonathan seemed with Sophie. He listened intently to her chatter, answered her endless questions with patience, and seemed genuinely delighted by her enthusiasm for everything they encountered. In the dinosaur exhibit, Sophie stood wide-eyed in front of a massive T-Rex skeleton. "Mr. Jonathan, how did they know how to put all the bones back together?" "That's a great question," he replied seriously. "Scientists called paleontologists study the bones and figure out where each piece belongs, like putting together a giant puzzle." "I want to be a paleontologist," Jonathan helped. "Yes. I want to find dinosaur bones." "I think you'd be excellent at that. You're already great at asking the right questions." Watching them together, Natasha felt something shift in her chest. Jonathan wasn't just being polite to Sophie, he was genuinely engaged with her, treating her questions and excitement as important. It had been so long since Sophie had a positive male figure in her life, Natasha had forgotten what it could look like. In the hands-on experiment area, Jonathan helped Sophie build a volcano that actually erupted with foam, getting his expensive shoes slightly dirty in the process. He didn't seem to notice or care. "Look, Mommy!" Sophie shrieked with delight as foam bubbled over the sides of their creation. "It's exploding." "I see that, baby. Very impressive. Mr. Jonathan helped me measure the ingredients. He's really good at science." "Is he?" Natasha smiled at Jonathan, who looked pleased by Sophie's approval. "I had good teachers," he said, "and an excellent assistant today." They spent 4 hours at the museum, and Natasha couldn't remember when she had seen Sophie so happy. Every new exhibit brought fresh wonder, every interaction brought new questions, and Jonathan seemed as fascinated by Sophie's reactions as she was by the displays. As they sat in the museum cafe sharing ice cream, Sophie chattering about her favorite exhibits, Natasha found herself studying Jonathan's face. The arrogance she had noticed at his office was completely absent. In its place was warmth, attention, and what looked like genuine affection for her daughter. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly while Sophie was distracted by a group of children at the next table. "I'm thinking that you're different than I expected." "Different how?" "More real. Less like the businessman I see at the office and more like someone I might actually want to know." "That's because this is who I really am," Jonathan said simply. Or who I want to be. Being with you and Sophie makes me remember what actually matters. And what's that? Kindness, wonder, taking time to see the world through someone else's eyes. He glanced at Sophie, who was now trying to teach the other children how to make volcano sounds. She's remarkable, you know. Brilliant and curious and completely unspoiled by the world. I've tried to protect her from people who might make her feel small. You've done an incredible job. She's confident and joyful and treats everyone like a friend. That comes from you. Natasha felt warmth spread through her chest. Thank you. That means a lot. Can I ask you something? Jonathan's voice was hesitant. What happened to Sophie's father? Natasha's expression tightened slightly. It was the question she had been waiting for, dreading. He left when I told him I was pregnant. Said he wasn't ready to be a father and disappeared. I haven't heard from him since. I'm sorry. His loss. That's what I tell myself. Some days I believe it more than others. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie demonstrate her volcano technique to her new friends. Can I tell you something? Sure. I've never wanted to be a father before. Never thought I had it in me. But watching Sophie today, seeing how excited she gets about learning new things, how kind she is to everyone she meets, I find myself thinking that being someone's father might be the most important job in the world. Natasha's breath caught. Jonathan. I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I'm just telling you what's in my heart. Sophie deserves someone who thinks she hung the moon. And you deserve someone who sees what an incredible mother you are. They were interrupted by Sophie bouncing back to their table, her face flushed with excitement. Mommy? Mr. Jonathan. The kids want to know if I can come to their birthday party next weekend. Can I? Please? Natasha looked at the hopeful faces around the nearby table. Where's the party, sweetheart? At Emma's house. She goes to Riverside Elementary too. We'll be in the same school. Emma's mother approached their table with a smile. I hope you don't mind. The girls hit it off immediately. Emma would love to have Sophie at her party next Saturday. That's very kind, Natasha said. Are you sure? Absolutely. Sophie is delightful. Here's my number. She handed Natasha a card. Text me and I'll send you the details. After they exchanged information and the other family left, Sophie bounced in her chair. Mommy, I made a friend. A real friend who goes to my new school. I'm so happy for you, baby. And she likes dinosaurs too. And science. And she has a dog named Charlie. As they walked back to Jonathan's car, Sophie skipping ahead, Natasha felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of belonging somewhere. Not just surviving but actually belonging. Thank you for today, she told Jonathan as he helped Sophie into her car seat. This meant the world to her. It meant the world to me too, he replied. Would you like to do this again? Maybe next weekend we could take Sophie to the zoo? Or the aquarium? Natasha looked at Sophie's bright, happy face in the rearview mirror, then at Jonathan's hopeful expression. Yes, she said softly. I'd like that. As they drove back to her new apartment, Sophie chattering about her day from the back seat, Natasha allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they were building something real. Something that could last. Something that felt like the beginning of a family. 6 months later, Natasha barely recognized her life. What had started as cautious hope had blossomed into something beautiful and unexpected. Jonathan had become a constant presence in their lives, but not in an overwhelming way. He seemed to understand that trust was built slowly, through consistency and kindness rather than grand gestures. Sophie was thriving at Riverside Elementary. Her teacher had called twice to praise her reading level and her willingness to help struggling classmates. She had made several close friends, including Emma from the museum, and their apartment was often filled with the sound of children playing. Natasha's career was flourishing too. Catherine's faith in her abilities had been well placed. She had successfully managed the opening of a new hotel, implemented cost-saving measures across all properties, and earned the respect of both staff and vendors. For the first time in her life, she felt professionally valued and intellectually challenged. But it was the relationship with Jonathan that surprised her most. He had approached their courtship with patience and genuine care, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, always considering Sophie's feelings and needs alongside her own. Tonight was different though. Sophie was at Patricia's house for a sleepover, and Jonathan had asked Natasha to dinner at his family's mansion. Not for a party or social event, but for a quiet family dinner with just his parents. Natasha stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting her emerald green dress. It was another purchase from her new salary, and she still sometimes marveled at being able to buy clothes without calculating the cost of groceries first. Jonathan picked her up at exactly 7, looking handsome in a navy suit that complemented her dress perfectly. But there was something different about him tonight. He seemed nervous, excited, like he was holding on to a secret. "You look stunning," he said, kissing her cheek softly. "Green is definitely your color." "Thank you. You seem energetic tonight. Everything all right?" "Everything is perfect," he said, but his smile was mysterious. "I just hope tonight goes the way I'm hoping it will." The Mitchell mansion looked different in the soft evening light. Less imposing, more like a home. Catherine greeted them at the door with warm hugs, and Thomas emerged from his study with a genuine smile that had become familiar over the past months. "Natasha, dear, you look lovely," Catherine said. Come in. Dinner won't be ready for a few minutes." "Thomas, why don't you show Natasha the new paintings we acquired for the library?" "Actually, Mom," Jonathan interrupted, "I was hoping we could talk in the garden first. All of us together." Something in his tone made everyone pause. Catherine and Thomas exchanged glances, and Natasha felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with nervousness. They walked through the French doors onto the terrace where she and Jonathan had first talked privately all those months ago. The garden was beautiful in the evening light, with fairy lights strung through the trees and the fountain sparkling in the center. "Natasha," Jonathan began, then stopped and took a deep breath. "These past 6 months have been the best of my life. Getting to know you, watching Sophie grow and thrive, becoming part of your lives, it's changed everything about who I am and what I want." Natasha's heart began to race. "Jonathan, please, let me finish before I lose my courage." He smiled nervously. "You've made me want to be better than I ever thought I could be. You've shown me what real strength looks like, what real love looks like. And Sophie. Sophie has taught me that being someone's father isn't about biology, it's about showing up every day with love and commitment and the determination to help them become their best selves." He dropped to one knee and Natasha gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Behind them, she could hear Catherine's soft exclamation of delight. Jonathan pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a stunning but not ostentatious diamond ring. "Natasha Williams, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life loving you and Sophie? Will you let me be the father she deserves and the husband you both deserve?" Tears were streaming down Natasha's face. The proposal was everything she could have hoped for, focused not just on her but on Sophie, on the family they had already begun building together. "What about Sophie?" she managed to ask through her tears. "Did you?" "I asked her permission last week," Jonathan said with a grin. "She said, and I quote, 'Of course you can marry my mommy. Then we'll be a real family and you can help me with my science projects forever.'" Natasha laughed through her tears. "She didn't?" "She did. She also helped me pick out the ring. She said it had to be sparkly but not too big because you don't like it when things are too fancy. She knows me well. So do I. And I love everything I know. I love your strength, your kindness, your dedication to Sophie, your laugh, the way you make everyone around you feel valued and important. I love the way you've made me want to be worthy of you." "Jonathan," Natasha said softly, "you already are worthy. You've shown me and Sophie more love and respect in 6 months than most people show in a lifetime. Is that a yes?" Natasha looked around at the faces watching them. Catherine was crying openly, her hands clasped together in joy. Thomas was beaming with approval. This family that had once seemed so far above her had welcomed her and Sophie with open hearts and genuine love. "Yes," she said, reaching down to cup Jonathan's face in her hands. "Yes, of course, yes." Jonathan slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promise and joy and the beginning of forever. Catherine and Thomas rushed forward with congratulations and hugs. Catherine was already talking about wedding plans, asking Natasha about her preferences, making it clear that this would be exactly the wedding she wanted, not some society spectacle. "When?" Thomas asked practically. "How long do you need to plan?" Natasha looked at Jonathan. "I don't need a huge production. Something simple, something focused on what matters." "What matters to you?" Jonathan asked. "Family. Well, Sophie walking down the aisle with us because this isn't just about you and me. It's about the 3 of us becoming officially what we already are in our hearts." "Perfect," Catherine said, wiping happy tears from her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." As they walked back inside to celebrate with champagne, sparkling cider for Sophie when they picked her up later, Natasha caught a glimpse of her reflection in the French doors. The woman looking back at her was confident, radiant, loved. She barely resembled the scared, tired woman who had stood in the rain outside this same house not even a year ago. "What are you thinking about?" Jonathan asked, following her gaze. "I'm thinking about how sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places," she said. "I'm thinking about how a cruel joke became the most beautiful truth. I'm thinking about how lucky I am that you gave me a second chance. I'm thinking about how lucky we all are." That night, as they drove to pick up Sophie and share the news, Natasha twisted the engagement ring on her finger and marveled at the turns life could take. This morning she had been a single mother, grateful for the stability and security she had found. Tonight, she was an engaged woman, part of a family that had chosen to love her and Sophie completely. Sophie's reaction to the news was everything they could have hoped for. She screamed with delight, hugged them both fiercely, and immediately began planning how she would help with the wedding. "Can I wear a pretty dress?" she asked. "The prettiest dress we can find," Natasha promised. "Can I walk with you and Mr. Jonathan?" "We wouldn't have it any other way," Jonathan said. "Can we have cake?" Everyone laughed. "Lots of cake," Natasha assured her. As they tucked Sophie into bed that night, she looked up at them with sleepy contentment. "Mommy?" "Yes, baby?" "I told my friend Emma that wishes really do come true. I wished for a daddy who would love us and play with me and make you smile. And now I have one." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. "Sophie, I need you to know something important." "What?" "I'm not just marrying your mommy. I want to adopt you too if that's okay with you. I want to be your daddy officially, legally, forever." Sophie sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Really? I can be Sophie Mitchell? If you want to be." Yes, I want to be." "Then everyone will know you're my real daddy." As they kissed Sophie goodnight and turned off her light, Natasha felt a completeness she had never experienced before. They were already a family in all the ways that mattered, but soon they would be a family officially, legally, permanently. The scared woman who had stood in the rain 6 months ago had been transformed by love, kindness, and the courage to believe she deserved good things. Now she was planning a wedding, building a career, and raising her daughter in a home filled with love and laughter. Sometimes, Natasha thought as she fell asleep in Jonathan's arms, fairy tales really do come true. Sometimes the princess saves herself, and sometimes the prince learns to be worthy of her love. And sometimes, just sometimes, everyone lives happily ever after. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect spring weather that felt like nature's blessing on their union. Natasha woke in her apartment, her last morning there as a single woman, to the sound of Sophie singing in the kitchen, her voice mixing with Patricia's laughter. "Mommy's getting married today," Sophie announced when Natasha emerged, still in her pajamas. Patricia made special wedding day pancakes. The pancakes were heart-shaped and decorated with fresh berries, a sweet touch that made Natasha's eyes well up. Patricia had been such an important part of their journey, and having her here to share this moment felt exactly right. "How are you feeling, honey?" Patricia asked, studying Natasha's face. "Any nerves?" "None," Natasha said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They had chosen to have the wedding in the garden of the Mitchell mansion, but not the formal affair it could have been. Instead, they had created something intimate and joyful, focused on family and the promise of new beginnings. Catherine arrived mid-morning with a team of hairstylists and makeup artists, but also with lunch and an easy confidence that put everyone at ease. "How's our bride?" she asked, embracing Natasha warmly. "Perfect," Patricia answered before Natasha could speak. "Look at her glow. That's pure happiness right there." As the stylists worked on their hair and makeup, Sophie chattered excitedly about her dress, about walking down the aisle, about the party afterward. She had decided she wanted to be both flower girl and junior bridesmaid, a role that had been created just for her. "Mommy, will you still be my mommy after you marry Mr. Jonathan?" "Always and forever, baby. But now you'll also have a daddy who loves you very much. And grandparents," Sophie added. Catherine said I should call her Grandma Catherine now. Natasha's heart swelled. The easy way the Mitchell family had embraced Sophie, the genuine love they showed her, still amazed her sometimes. The preparations continued with easy joy rather than stress. When it was time to get into their dresses, Natasha couldn't help but think of that first red dress she had worn to Jonathan's party, how she had felt both nervous and determined. Today's dress was different, a flowing blue gown that made her feel like herself, only more radiant. Sophie's dress was a matching shade of blue with tiny white flowers, and she looked like a princess from her favorite storybooks. "We look beautiful, Mommy," Sophie declared, spinning in front of the mirror. We do indeed, my love. Patricia, elegant in her silver mother-of-the-bride dress, watched them with tears in her eyes. I wish my Harold could see this, she said softly. He always said you were special, Natasha. He would be so proud. At 4 o'clock they made their way to the garden. The transformation was breathtaking but not overwhelming. White chairs arranged in small groups rather than formal rows, flowers everywhere but not ostentatiously so, fairy lights ready to twinkle as the sun set. Everything felt warm and welcoming rather than intimidating. The guest list was small but meaningful. Patricia and her family, Natasha's co-workers from the hotel, Sophie's teacher and several classmates with their parents, Jonathan's friend Liam, and a few close family friends of the Mitchells. People who truly cared about them, people who wanted to celebrate their love rather than be seen at a social event. As the string quartet began to play, Natasha felt a moment of pure gratitude. A year ago she could never have imagined this scene, this life, this overwhelming sense of belonging and being loved. Jonathan stood at the makeshift altar with his father beside him as best man, both men looking handsome in their navy suits. When Jonathan saw Natasha, his face lit up with such joy that several guests audibly sighed. But it was Sophie who stole the show, walking down the aisle with a basket of flower petals, beaming at every person she passed as if personally welcoming them to her parents' wedding. She took her role very seriously, making sure to sprinkle petals evenly and wave at everyone she knew. Then came Natasha, walking not with someone giving her away, but independently, confidently, choosing her own future. She had asked Patricia to stand with Sophie during the ceremony, creating a visual reminder that family was chosen as much as it was given. When she reached Jonathan, he took her hands and spoke quietly just for her. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. So are you, she whispered back. Inside and out. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. They had written their own vows, promising not just love and faithfulness, but specific commitments to the life they were building together. Jonathan, Natasha said clearly, her voice carrying to every guest, I promise to love you not just for who you are today but for who you're becoming. I promise to be your partner in building a family based on kindness, respect, and joy. I promise to trust you with my heart and with Sophie's happiness. Natasha, Jonathan replied, his voice thick with emotion, I promise to love you and Sophie with everything I have. I promise to be the father Sophie deserves and the husband you deserve. I promise to never take for granted the gift of being part of your lives. But it was Sophie's moment that brought tears to every eye. The officiant asked if there were any special promises to be made, and Sophie stepped forward with the confidence of a child who knew she was deeply loved. I promise to be the best daughter ever, she announced solemnly, and to help Daddy learn how to braid hair and make my lunch just the way I like it. The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, and when Jonathan knelt down to hug Sophie and promised to be the best daddy he could be, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss was tender and joyful, but it was the three-way hug that followed that really sealed their union as a family. The reception was exactly what they had wanted. Relaxed, fun, focused on celebration rather than formality. Sophie danced with everyone who would dance with her, Jonathan's father taught several children to waltz, Catherine chatted easily with Patricia and Natasha's co-workers, and the whole evening felt like the best kind of family party. As the sun set and the fairy lights began to twinkle, Natasha found herself standing with Jonathan at the edge of the garden, watching their guests mingle and Sophie chase fireflies with her friends. Any regrets? Jonathan asked, slipping his arm around her waist. Only that it took us so long to find each other. We found each other exactly when we were supposed to, he said wisely. When we were both ready to appreciate what we had. I love you, husband, Natasha said, trying out the word. I love you too, wife. Both of you. A year later, they were back in the same garden, but this time for Sophie's 6th birthday party. She ran around in her bright yellow dress, playing with a mix of school friends and neighborhood children, completely confident in her place in the world. Natasha, now visibly pregnant with their second child, watched from a garden chair while Jonathan coordinated party games with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered he was born to be a father. How are you feeling, dear? Catherine asked, settling beside her with 2 glasses of lemonade. Perfect, Natasha replied, one hand resting on her growing belly. Completely, perfectly happy. And she meant it. The scared single mother who had stood in the rain outside this very house was still part of her, but she had been joined by so many other versions of herself. The successful businesswoman, the beloved wife, the confident mother preparing to welcome a second child, the daughter-in-law treasured by Jonathan's parents, the friend valued by her colleagues. Sophie ran over to them, flushed and breathless from playing. "Mommy? The baby's kicking. Want to feel?" Natasha asked, taking Sophie's small hand and placing it on her belly. Sophie's eyes grew wide as she felt her sibling move. "I think the baby wants to come to my party." "Not quite yet, sweetheart. But soon." "I can't wait to be a big sister," Sophie said seriously. "I'm going to teach the baby everything I know about dinosaurs and science and how to make friends." As Jonathan joined them, sweaty from playing tag with a dozen 6-year-olds, Natasha marveled again at the turns life could take. The invitation that had been meant as a cruel joke had become the opening line of the most beautiful story she could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Jonathan asked, settling beside her and kissing her temple. "I'm thinking about invitation," she said. "About how sometimes the worst things lead to the best things." "I'm thinking about how lucky I am that you said yes to everything," he replied. "To the job, to dinner, to marrying me, to building this life together." "I'm thinking about how lucky we all are," Sophie added, leaning against both of them. As the party continued around them, as their friends and family celebrated together, as the sun set over the garden where they had promised to love each other forever, Natasha felt the deep contentment of someone who had found her place in the world. She had learned to say yes to love, to opportunity, to the possibility that she deserved every good thing life had to offer. And in return, life had given her everything she had never dared to dream of: a career she loved, a family that cherished her, and a future bright with possibility. Sometimes, she thought as Sophie ran back to her friends and Jonathan went to help cut the birthday cake, the best endings are really just the beginning of something even more beautiful. And this was definitely just the beginning.